Good evening, everyone, and welcome to SocialFlight Live. I'm Jeff Simon. We have such a fascinating show for you this evening. John Uczekaj is here, CEO and president of Aspen Avionics, and I'm just thrilled to talk to him about his background, the company background, and of course, the future of avionics in the segment and what's happening at Aspen. Before we get started, just a few tips as always. We started SocialFlight to support you in general aviation, all of you, and the show SocialFlight Live, that started when the pandemic started so that we could be here to bring inspirational guests such as John to the show and talk to you, bring you all together about what's happening in general aviation. And so we are quickly approaching onto our 100th show, and I'm absolutely thrilled about that. And we have a lot of cool things going on. So be sure to check out SocialFlight.com and the free SocialFlight mobile apps for Apple and Android devices. We have tens of thousands of events and destinations, places to fly. We want you to get out there and fly, support all those airports and airport restaurants and airport and aviation businesses, and check it all out. And while you're doing that, you will be able to enter to win in the Fly to Win Challenge, and that is available on the SocialFlight mobile app. All you need to do is fly and check in at an airport. It's all automatic, super easy, and just gives you points. And then we are having our next drawing on March 1st for a Lightspeed Zulu 3 headset. Really thrilled about that, and we just keep going with prize after prize after prize. So be sure to get the app and check all of that out. Now, this has been a really exciting couple weeks for me, especially here at SocialFlight. Last week, we had the show with both of the Patey brothers, Mark and Mike Patey, and they were being nominated for the Living Legends of Aviation award. And so I had an opportunity. I just returned from this amazing trip to Los Angeles where I joined my good friends Barry and Brian Schiff in that visit to LA to get to visit with them and their friends and see the airport, everything else going on out there, and also attend the Living Legends of Aviation event, which is hosted in Beverly Hills and honors these amazing, amazing individuals. So I wanted to share with you for a quick minute just a few things from that, because I don't think a lot of people get a quick peek into what it's like to go to one of these events with these leaders of aviation and the folks that really make all of this happen. And so this is Brian Schiff and I as we walked into the show, went to the red carpet. I had this opportunity to meet Aaron Tippin as well. He performed. Great show, really fantastic, and an amazing human being there. And then, of course, this is Kurt Russell, one of the living legends of aviation. I'll tell you, it is just absolutely amazing going out there and seeing all of that, and also got to spend some time there with both of the Patey brothers as they had their nominations, as mentioned earlier, into that. And it you know, just leads in perfectly, because tonight's guest, John Uczekaj, is himself one of the living legends of aviation. And here he is with Jim Lovell, Apollo, Last Man on the Moon. And I'm just thrilled to be able to transition from that into having him as my next guest here on SocialFlight Live. But before I even do that, since we're here to talk about Aspen and all of that, I wanted to show you a little bit about what you might have seen in some of our videos here at SocialFlight. And that is that we actually fly behind Aspen products. I am an absolute huge fan of the EFD 1000 and their Evolution products. They've been a remarkable upgrade for our Beach Bonanza. And I want to show you something cool. If we have a video that is from our trip out to Glacier National Park. It's a great video, shows a lot of very difficult flying through weather and challenges and a lot of terrain. And one of the things that I absolutely love about this piece of avionics is that the Aspen unit in its format really allows you to see far ahead and have this synthetic vision view, which you can see here. We were flying down a canyon with a river, in this case, this was our exit from Glacier National Park. And it's really remarkable how the unit can help you when you're navigating through terrain like this. And so I just wanted to share this picture because I found it very, very dramatic and very useful. And in an age where we're looking for easier avionics to install and direct replacements, a lot of times that can be, a small square instrument, but you don't have that ability at a great price point to have something that shows this vertical view. And so I wanted to share that along with everyone. And with that, behind me, you see this mock-up here that's right next to me of our T-51 Mustang, which if I move to the side is happening right behind me. This is the panel for that. And we built the entire panel starting dead center with an Aspen Pro PFD, an Evolution Pro PFD, and that's going to be the center of that as well. It just makes it so easy to transition back and forth between the aircraft and have the same avionics and avionics that I've really grown to trust and love and rely on with that. So that's kind of my quick show and tell of the past week, and also some of my affinity that I have with Aspen. Now, Aspen Avionics President and CEO John Uczekaj has over 35 years of experience in the avionics industry. His resume includes such iconic names as Boeing, Sperry, and Honeywell. It gives him a unique experience level that he puts to work to lead Aspen Avionics into the future. John received the Avionics Industry's Entrepreneur of the Year Award in 2012 and was inducted into the Living Legends of Aviation in 2013. He's a member of the board of directors of the General Aviation Manufacturers Association, or GAMA, and as you might expect, he's an instrument-rated pilot as well. I'm going to bring him online now. John has been a supporter of our work here at SocialFlight from the very beginning. I'm fortunate to call him a friend as well. Please help me welcome John Uczekaj. John, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate it. Appreciate all your kind words as well. It's a really pleasure to be on with you.
Well, they're really sincere. I mean, it's been fascinating to see the evolution in the avionics industry. And I don't want to miss your personal history. I want to get back to that, but I will say that it's been wild to see all of these transitions that have happened. But Aspen really was one of the first to come out there and say we're going to try to make avionics installation and cost a lot easier than it had been. And I think you broke a lot of barriers in that.
Well, I appreciate that. I always think about that as well, because I just going back to my career, I started out in a Boeing 767 flight management system group back in the 80s, and I look at the aircraft I fly now, and they have more capable avionics than that 767 has. And even since Aspen started, you think about it, we started, our first product came out in 2008. The iPad wasn't even in the cockpit then, and so the evolution of our product and the evolution of aviation has been remarkable. But what we found is our basic premise of what we tried to do when the company started, an easy to install avionics, able to work with others, has really withstood the time of evolution of everything going on in the cockpit, because fundamentally that's still what is needed in the cockpit. In a retrofit aircraft, you've got to have an affordable solution that can provide you that and also grow with you. So it's remarkable to me the length of time that it is. In fact, it's kind of hard for me to even think that it was 2008 when the product came out. We're sitting here in 2022, and we're still basically fundamentally doing the same thing with new technologies now, with greater technologies. So the excitement of that is just great. It's great for me. It's great for my employees. Just overall, it's a very cool thing.
Yeah, it's amazing. So take me back a little bit for your background. I mentioned it really briefly, but I'd like everyone to kind of understand where you came from to get to the helm. A lot of people are interested, of course, in what's it take to be a leader in the avionics industry or somewhere else in aviation, and also your personal flying.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things about my background is probably similar to a lot of other people's backgrounds. I was so excited when I came out of college to get into the digital world, and I will date myself for those of you that are in the younger generation. I'm sorry about that. But you got to remember, when I came out of school, most everything in the cockpit was analog based. Even flight controls were analog based. My dad was a 737 flight controls engineer, and I remember doing and or gates to do autopilot mode logic and control laws and stuff like that. And so when I came out of school, it was all about software and computers and stuff like that. that was so much fun because it redefined everything. So what it meant is that people like myself, who just out of college could design on at the same, in parallel with these highly experienced people who bring all their breadth of experience. And what it allowed me to do is get involved in design work at a very early stage of my career. And during that design work, I spent a lot of times with pilots. I have all kinds of stories. I'm gonna tell you one story on my Boeing days. When you're new in there and these Boeing guys are out there, I remember I was working on a VOR antenna on a 767. It was cold, rainy night in Seattle and down at Boeing Field, and they put me up on this big jack because the VOR antenna sits on top of the fin of the aircraft, and it's raining, it's wind is blowing, and I'm up there in a walkie-talkie, and they're telling me, I'm trying to measure these things on the VOR, and these guys are just laughing at me up there, and they go on a break. And I'm sitting up there for like 15 minutes swaying in the wind, and they got such a laugh out of that, and because I was just trying to learn everything I could from these experienced people, they got a laugh out of it. And one of the guys that's there is still a buddy of mine today. And so I think the personal relationships that you make early in your career are so genuine and so important to your development as an individual and as a leader, because you get to know people and what really drives them, and you're not a threat to them in terms of, you're not their manager, you're just a guy out there trying to learn, and you're trying to soak up as much as possible. And I think that set a foundation for a lot of the way I developed my career and my personality. Now, it helps to come from an aviation family. While none of my family are pilots, I come from a family of 9. So 9 of us, 7 kids. At one point, all 9 of us worked at Boeing at some point. My dad retired from Boeing after 40 years. My mother retired from Boeing after 40 years. My older sisters just retired from Boeing. And being around aviation people, whether they're pilots or not, is fun and exciting. And so because of those relationships my family had at Boeing, I met a lot of people within Boeing and stuff like that. And so even though I was only at Boeing for about 4 years, it left a strong mark on me because of just the community that was there at Boeing and what it was like back in the 80s. I left Boeing to go do software, basically, flight management software. So one of the funny things is that I have is my time at Sperry and such. I've written software that are in units that are still flying in some commercial jets.
Wow.
So in flight management systems in 767, there's software that's running there. The older Gulfstreams, I've written software. So that type of thing, when I went to Sperry, allowed me to do hands-on software development, and that taught me that software is not easy, and certifying it is not easy, in spite of how simple it may seem when people say it's just software. Nothing is just anything in the aviation world, and that technical experience got me again more and more involved. In business jet community, I work with great people like Press Henny, people, the Dassault family, Jack Pelton, Russ Meyer, Charlie Johnson, these guys that are icons today, I got a chance to work with. And that was kind of a golden age of the business jet. And I learned not just about the business, but I learned how to be a leader. And, I always have a saying that, being a leader and being a nice guy or a nice person is sometimes very difficult to do. And people that can do that are inspirational. And people like Russ Meyer and Jack Pelton, Mark Van Tine, these kinds of people are just, they're just genuinely nice people. And the other thing is at Sperry, and then Honeywell, of course, purchased Sperry, I got to fulfill a lot of different roles. And I was at one point part of sales and marketing, program management, engineering, general management. And I recommend to anybody who's developing their leadership skills to have those kinds of experiences, because a salesperson is not an engineer, and an engineer is not a finance person. And you have to be able to work with all those people as a leader, and you learn them and you build relationships. I think is just a key. I will tell you, and I've been talking a long time, so I'll take a breath here in a second, but making the transition to a startup probably was the biggest change for me, and really changed who I was, both as a leader and as a person, because when you're in a big company, you have a lot of infrastructure around you. You've got fantastic people, and you got lots of them, and they do everything you can imagine, and they make you really, really look good. And in a lot of ways, leaders in larger organizations get a lot of credit when the people below them are the ones that are doing the real cool work, and you learn that. But when you get into a startup and you got to rely on yourself, and you don't have the safety net of all these wonderful people around you, you soon learn where your strengths are, and more importantly, where your weaknesses are. And once you know your weaknesses, you find people to surround yourself to counter those weaknesses. And that's not easy in a small company, because you can't hire hundreds of people. You can hire tens of people out of the gate. And that changed my view of leadership, changed my view of relationships, and even changed my absolute management style. And I think I strongly suggest anybody, the excitement of a startup and things like that is just so much. So that's kind of a long-winded thing, but that's kind of how I would describe my evolution of, as a leader and also as a business person.
That is fascinating. And I can say, I'm obviously also worked at Honeywell. That is, it really speaks to me, that approach that you've taken, and I've always admired the way that you manage and you lead. So I do put you in that same category, and it's interesting that you talk about the skill of people who can be, I guess, both nice, likable, kind, generous individuals, and also strong and effective leaders. And you mentioned Mark Van Tine as a perfect example. Yeah,
Mark's a good friend of mine. He got to sit with me at Legends, so we got to catch up with him. He's one of my favorite individuals. What he did at Jeppesen and what he does now is just remarkable. He's one of those kind of guys.
Yeah, really fascinating. Now, you're also, of course, a General Aviation pilot. Tell me a little bit about that, and how that perspective is fed into how you make decisions, or maybe some product design things that you do, because I think that's an important two sides of the coin as well.
Yeah. So I had always aspired to be a pilot ever since I really started at Boeing. But to be honest with you, career kind of got in the way, because I was always having to travel a lot, large organizations. And one of the reasons why Aspen really was a remarkable thing for me is that part of why I took the job at Aspen as a startup without never doing a startup was because it gave me the opportunity to become a pilot. So I got my pilot's license in 2009. In fact, right behind my shoulder, you can see my little first flight pilot and my instrument rating, little things you get from AOPA. It's one of my most prized possessions. And because I really wanted to become a pilot. So I started taking flight lessons, and I worked with some great people at Aspen in the flight department who allowed me. Tom Gray, who's no longer with me, I think he works at GAMA now. He was one of the guys who took me up and out of the Kirtland Air Force Base and flying those 172s and out of Albuquerque. And for me, that was like, whoa, these are big jets, and I'm taxiing right next to these fighter jets and stuff like that. And it was like I felt like a kid again. So I went and got my pilot's license, and then I got my instrument rating, and that fundamentally changed the way I think about our business and about our equipment. So when you're flying behind it and you're under stress, whether it be weather or whether it be flying into the LA basin with 6 million other people or whatever it is, you tend to quickly recognize functionality that has saved the day versus that was, gosh, I wish I had that, because if I'd had that, I would not be sweating like I am now. And that really rolls into the equipment. Now, I've also, because of that, have tried to surround myself with pilots. So, like, for example, all our salespeople are pilots, and they all fly airplanes. And in fact, we have them fly on behalf of Aspen, because not only are they able to get into, the business aspects of getting into airports and places where our dealers are at, which are hard to get to unless you drive. And not only is it because you're trying to sell something, if you pull up in a rental car trying to sell something to a Bonanza driver, he kind of looks at you like, yeah, really? But more importantly, the feedback that they give in their daily use of the equipment is extremely important. So I always joke that the day I became a pilot, I became so much smarter. And my sales guys say, you weren't smarter, it's just people now listen to you because you're a pilot. So
I like that. That's really, really funny. When I go back and I think about when I first saw the Aspen Evolution system at AirVenture for the first time, I think it may have even been called Oshkosh back then. It struck me because the company was taking an approach of trying to essentially knock down obstacles. That's what it looked like to me. What can we do? How can we make something easier to install? We don't want to have to cut a panel. We don't want to have to, we want to bring the cost down, bring the installation cost down as much as we can, and yet make glass technology affordable. And that was at a time where the regulatory hurdles were very, very, very steep and still used to kind of old school approach to glass. Tell me a little bit about that and how that approach has kind of carried you through, because regulations have changed since then a little bit, and maybe the environment has changed a little bit. But you've got a product that had to be designed from the beginning to be cost effective and easy to install against that market, and it's still that way today.
Yeah, it's so the real founders, Peter Lyons and Jeff Bethel, who really were the original people out of Eclipse. They had a very strong belief, and I think it's followed through, that certified was the way to go. That doesn't make non-certified any different, but certified was a way to go. And the certification requirements back then, in regards to backups, in regards to all kinds of different things, were extremely important. Like even at the beginning, we picked to put this thing in, and many of the aircraft that we put in didn't have GPSs. Okay, so AHAR solutions are aided by GPSs today to ensure that when you lose pitot-static or something like that, you continue to have AHARs. So one of the biggest things when we came out is you lose pitot-static, we red X'd, because we had to be able to provide it with a GPS. That certification hurdle to provide that was incredible. The early days of cross-check attitude messaging that we still have in our system today was born out of the certification requirements that said we had to make sure that when things started to get out of whack, we were able to inform the pilot in time for him to do something about, instead of just shutting the system down. That still exists today, but those were all new regulatory hurdles that one had to get over. And that was pretty incredible at the time, and in an environment that was pre, the Part 23 rewrites. And in many ways, they were applying Part 25-like constraints to Part 23 aircraft, which of course inhibited the ability to bring new technologies to this part of the market. And those were big hurdles. And when we got our ticket in March of 2008, I mean, it was a big party, because that was an amazing thing to accomplish. People don't really realize it, but in that day, in those certification requirements to bring a glass panel into a retrofit aircraft with all the functionality the Evolution had, it was pretty amazing. And we still, I still have that plaque in my office because it's so exciting. So, but as time has gone on, the FAA has through a lot of good work by a lot of the agents, a lot of the support groups like GAMA and AOPA and EAA, and many of my competitors, we kind of drove a lot of the concept of bringing safety enhancing equipment to the cockpit. And the FAA really saw that. They saw that by bringing this functionality into the cockpit, you'd have a safer flying public. And I know everybody wants to cite statistics and stuff like that, but all you have to do is fly behind a glass cockpit, between an analog cockpit, on an approach in the clouds, and there's no way you can tell me it's not safer, because you have everything there for you, and redundancy and things like that. And I think there's a great credit to the FAA, the people in the FAA, that really saw that vision and tried to really improve the flying public's safety in terms of bringing this together and finding a way to do that while keeping the safety bar very high, because it's still very high. Certifying is not an easy thing. And so I just, it's easy to forget that just 14 years ago, or 10 to 14 years ago, certifying was a lot harder, yet we still are certifying what people say might be easier. What it is it's more practical, and the safety levels are still just as high. The bar is just as high to certify these types of equipment, but they found ways to take advantage of the latest technology.
Well, it seems to me that one of the big awakenings of the FAA has been this understanding of relative safety that did not used to exist in the past. I mean, that back when you were certifying that you either had to be at mission critical top level certification, the same way you would be doing it for almost for an airliner. And if that's being compared against a vacuum system that they would send out, service bulletins that say, don't use this in IMC flight because it's so unreliable. And that, to have those two things side by side seemed completely unrealistic. And so they seem to now say, we get that a little bit. We want to bring things that to market that can get rid of things that we know are problematic.
Yeah. And Jeff, you hit it right on the money. I mean, that transition to looking at what you call relative safety in terms of, are you improving the safety of an aircraft by putting a glass panel in? So for example, and removing your vacuum system. So at the end of the day, it makes all the practical sense of the world, and everybody would kind of nod their head and say, yeah, that makes sense. But when you're trying to certify it, it's not easy to prove that. And the FAA found ways through processes and through looking at data to determine that it is in fact better to remove a vacuum pump and put in an electronic device for your attitude, speed, and altitude things, and your attitude indicator, and that improves the safety. Because if a vacuum pump fails, as you know, it fails in ways that can be confusing to a guy that's maybe in the closet, or even a VFR guy that's just flying around. And with an electronic device, we have the ability to be able to identify where failures or where things are degrading, and let the pilot know so that he can make wise decisions. And I think that revelation by the FAA and being able to apply process steps to proving that was a great breakthrough. It was, I mean, these are smart people in the FAA and in the industry. I can't really say more about GAMA and that group of people that really went after it, pulling all of us competitors together to improve that. And that's actually what's so cool about our industry, is we're always looking for ways to be safer, but we also know that you can't just say you're safer. You have to actually prove it. You actually have to have a way to prove it in order to be certified. And I think that's unique in our industry.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, the Aspen systems, what we think of as the core, of course, Aspen systems, the MFD and PFD. You've taken a very kind of modular approach to it, and it seems like I was pointing out earlier when I showed some screens from the way that I fly the Bonanza. In one way, I think you're looking at kind of the vertical axis, and you're able to either have separate instruments or kind of meld them into one view and expand that way. You've also been modular, kind of expanding to the left and right on the panel by adding additional systems that way. One of the things that's been interesting is how you've been able to keep the same core unit over these years and keep that price, but keep putting things into it. Tell me about like the MAX development, or what the thinking was to kind of keep life in this same design and this same philosophy.
Okay, so from the very beginning, we have always said that the Aspen stuff would be easy to install and easy to use and would be upgradable. So one of the frustrations, and even as a pilot, I'll tell you, like aircraft owner, you see all this new, what we call new shiny stuff out there, and you realize I got to tear apart my entire cockpit to get that new shiny stuff. And you can't do that like every 3 years. And technology is changing that quickly. Look at how quickly technology is changing. So our first move was to ensure that all those people that bought Aspens, the original Aspen Pros, that we would be able to allow them to take advantage of later technologies. Later technologies being higher resolution displays, additional functionality, higher speed processors, we remove the reliance on the pitot-static to get a GPS, so we have a degraded mode. These sort of things, we did not want to be away from our true beginnings and say, you're going to have to buy something different if you want all those cool things. And so the Pro Max was born out of that kind of I want to call it loyalty to our customers, and that they should have access to it, and they shouldn't have to tear up their cockpit to get that kind of functionality. And so we went with the Max upgrade path to ensure that those 15,000 users that we have out there are not stuck with dead ends and have to then go rip it up, because technology is changing so quickly. I mean, some of our customers that have the original Pros have only had them for 5 or 6 years, and they want to do some stuff. They want to have functionality that the new systems have. And so we have always done that, and we always do that. Now, will we move away from that type of size of display? We're certainly looking at things of different sizes of displays to find out what's right. We like our size of display because it fits nicely. When you add an MFD, you also get redundancy that others don't have. By hitting a button on an MFD 1000, you have full PFD. Not only have a full PFD, but you have the exact same looking PFD as your original one. So if you have a failure or an emergency, you can flip it, it's on, you got it. Or if you're nervous and you want dual attitudes up standing next to each other, you're looking at the same picture. And so when we loved our current size. Now we're looking at different sizes, and as technology, as glass technology comes, I've seen some pictures of these, wide 49-inch wide curved displays, and that's all coming to the cockpit. But you have to worry about redundancy, and you have to worry about the things there. And Aspen's looking at all those things. We really wanted our second generation display to support our customers. And when we do move to different display sizes, which it's inevitable, we'll offer products of different types. We're looking at them and working on them as well, and working with different types of customers to determine what works best. And the eVTOL market opens up a new space too, because the different kind of cockpit, different kind of glass needed. That will come, but we want to be sure that everybody knows it's got an Aspen Evolution system today, that is still a system that we're going to bring along for each of our of these customers. We're not going to leave you high and dry.
Well, I think speaking as a customer and a pilot, and then also on the installer side, an A&P and an IA, what you mentioned about the upgradability, that's really important to someone like me, and I think to a lot of our viewers. I think when I went to the Max, other than the logbook entry stuff that was involved, it was unplug it and plug it back in. And if you're able, I don't know if this is in your plan, but of course, if you're able to continue that type of kind of like of an approach that allows people to upgrade without a lot of pain in the field, even if they want to change formats or something like that, I think it's really, really important, and certainly makes a big difference out there, because as you mentioned, a lot of other things have very short shelf lives, and with the cost of avionics, especially on the installation side, it's tough to see something that you bought a couple of years ago become old news, and it isn't even the same connectors anymore. It isn't even the same anything. It's a big deal to upgrade. You always want to hear that if you're going to upgrade something, it's not a big deal. It's somehow incremental.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because when the iPad came out, everybody thought that was going to replace avionics, and you see that. And while the iPad's a fantastic thing, it's not something I would fly in IMC, for example. It's not made for that kind of thing. However, the iPad has set expectations to our pilot community. So they sit there and they look at those great apps like ForeFlight or the other ones, FlyQ, these other. I mean, you look at it every time they come up with a new thing, and it's fantastic, right? It's unbelievable what they come up with. The expectation set of that type of turnaround is got to bleed into our avionics, because we've got to be responsive to provide it. Now, we have different hurdles that iPad has, like it's got to stay on when the sun's on it and stuff like that. You can't overheat, but the expectation that the iPad has brought to the cockpit actually has been probably a nice eye opener for all of us in avionics. Yep. You see it whether it be on GPSs or EVIS displays, or even transponder displays now. You see that happening now, where that expectation to make our user interface more intuitive, and also be able to update it with, with new ideas is becoming a greater and greater demand on avionics. And while in the early days, people were saying, well, the iPad's going to replace these. I don't need a glass panel if I've got an iPad. Well, you soon learn flying that, looking up and looking down, or looking up and turning your head and doing all that stuff, even in VFR, is not the wisest thing to do. Certainly not in the clouds. So it didn't become a replacement. It became a complement to the glass panel displays. And now you find connectivity. We pioneered that in 2011. We were able to connect our Aspen and load flight plans into a 530 at the time. And you see every avionics guy's now got connectivity, including us. We're on the Pilatus aircraft, connectivity there. That ability to work together has been important for it. But again, I go back to the iPad is setting expectations for us avionics people to provide newer, better interfaces, easier use, touch screens that are usable, not just there because they're touch screens. We all know how difficult it is to use a touch screen, on a diamond aircraft when you're in the bouncing around all over the place. It's kind of hard to hold your finger straight, right? So we're all avionics people. We're all looking at that, and we're all looking at finding ways to do that. And you'll see that all our stuff is not touchscreen yet.
Right.
And we're looking at that too, and we're learning from the people that are out there that have got the touch screens, and we'll have those kinds of capabilities. But because the size of our display, it doesn't necessarily make sense to use a touch screen when you're bouncing around, especially if you have to reach through a yoke, for example, and while you're trying to fly. So all that stuff is important to understand. But again, I just believe the iPad has been a boom for our industry. And it's driven avionics people to think differently.
No, I definitely agree, and it's funny because I think I've always been a big fan of this concept, the hybrid touch, of where you've got some touch where it's appropriate, and you've got hard buttons where where else it's needed. Obviously, Dan Schwinn, our friends over at Avidyne, also do the same thing with their device, and of course that's pairs really well with Aspen. And I found it even myself installing Aspen, when you go and you say, oh, I want flush mount. Well, pretty soon you realize maybe I want it sticking out a tiny bit so I can rest with my fingertips just a little bit on the side. Like, you don't really necessarily want things that way. But it's fascinating because I think we're always trying to evolve where there's a certain amount of user interface that you want to be dynamic and out in the consumer market and not be critical to safety, so that can keep moving. And maybe we use it to get flight plans in, or we use that for a few other things. And then there's always a piece of it for output, where maybe for being able to see moving map on a large screen, you maybe can't afford for your display, etc. But that core stuff that goes in your panel, that's got to work all the time, especially if you're an IFR pilot. Right. And I think that's part of the core to all of this.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, you mentioned Avidyne, because obviously we play very well with Avidyne. Avidyne's approach to it, I find very interesting. I've flown behind the Avidyne system. I got to be honest with you, I love resting my handle on a knob. I got to be honest with you, when I'm bouncing around and I want to change frequencies. Maybe because I'm getting older, my coordination's not as good anymore. But I think a lot of things that Avidyne's doing is very advanced in trying to come up with that right balance. And we watch what they're doing, we watch what Garmin's doing, we watch what Dynon's doing, we watch what everybody's doing, and everybody's got an opinion, right? And there is no opinion that's wrong, right? Everybody has an opinion about how things are going. That's what's so cool about what's happening right now, is because there is so many choices out there, and you don't have to go with one solution. You can go with multiple solutions, and you can find that solution that best fits your flying. And one thing I have learned by being a pilot is that we all have opinions, right? All pilots have opinions about what's right and how to do it. No. You gotta accept that, right? I mean, if you accept that your customer is going to be different and is going to have all kinds of different opinions, you got to find a way to allow that within your system, or interfacing with other systems that complement that, or letting the guy pick and choose and putting it together. Maybe he likes a touch screen, in a center panel, but he doesn't want to reach through his yoke. Guy that's got a stick on the sides, not a big problem. So you're just touching the screen in front of you. And having those options is a unique time in our industry because people can mix and match. They can pick those things out there. They can match an Aspen with an Avidyne. You can match a 3100 autopilot with an Aspen, with an Avidyne, with a L3 Lynx, or with a Garmin. You got those choices, which I don't think existed 10 years ago. And I think pilots appreciate that. And I think it's important to the evolution of our industry. I always get the comments, oh, why does it cost so much? Why does it cost so much? Well, I'll tell you, the best way to keep costs down is competition. When you got people out there that are competing against either, whether it be in avionics or anywhere else, that's how prices come down. And we're finding a unique time in our industry where there's a lot of competition. And people are making deals and they're finding ways to get inexpensive avionics in their cockpit, and they're improving their safety, their flying capabilities. It's a fun time in avionics right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned something that's very, very near and dear to my heart, and that is integration and having that kind of open approach. I've certainly written about it in my AOPA columns, but I think it's so important, the power that it gives an aircraft owner, that if the components that you choose to invest in, if the products you decide are right for you for each mission, for each different product in your panel, are kind of open in what they do, then you have the ability not just to mix and match once, but down the road, as your needs evolve, or as the industry evolves and some new shiny thing comes out that is just the right thing for your plane, everyone who you've chosen in there, whether it be Aspen or Avidyne or L3 or whoever, or Genesis, they all have made an investment in open architecture in terms of their integration for being able to work over all these different buses. Tell me a little bit about what it's like to work in that environment, because that's gotta be tough.
Yeah, it's it's actually a really good question, Jeff, because it's a reasonable debate to have a federated integrated system, which I call multiple suppliers versus one supplier. It's a legitimate argument to have. Some people just want everything to look the same, right? And that's more important to them than having that choice that you say. And so there's enough choices out there that an individual aircraft owner can make those choices. So while I prefer, as an aircraft owner, and obviously I'm biased because I run Aspen, but I prefer the integrated, federated type of environment because I can do that. So for example, when let's say, because there's great advances in the GPS navigators, whether it be Avidyne or Garmin, these are great advances. Every time they come out with a new thing, it's just like a fun toy to have. So if you're locked into a fully one integrated type, you can't take advantage of it until that supplier decides he's going to do or not do something. And you have to, and that is a choice you make. Not a wrong choice, not a right choice. You make another choice where you have the ability to upgrade your navigator without upgrading your display system or your transponder or whatever else. You've now put yourself in a position where if something really, really cool comes out that you love for any reason, look, feel, functionality, say, doesn't matter what it is, you have the choice to be able to do that to your airplane and improve your flying enjoyment. That, I think, is key for a lot of people. It's not for everybody, but it's key for a lot of people. And we're finding that open system has created a great environment. Today it's autopilots, for example. Autopilots, you've got these fantastic autopilots coming out. Garmin autopilots, the DFC 90, which came out fast, unbelievable autopilots. The Genesis 3100 digital autopilots are just unbelievable autopilots. Those autopilots have got to be able to work with the equipment on an airplane. If you integrate them too much and now you're stuck with it, you will find yourself in a situation where you cannot upgrade other parts of your system because you're stuck with an autopilot that only works with a certain situation. I think that's a problem for our industry. I think if you don't have an open interface that allows you to, because you don't want to change autopilots every 6 years, right? You don't want to have to do that, right? I mean, that's a big deal, right? Even put an autopilot is a huge deal, right? So you got to have the open interfaces, and I push on all of my colleagues and competitors to have that. You're not doing, in my view, you're not doing a customer a favor by tying an autopilot to everything else, because then the guy is stuck there, and also you're limiting the expansion of these great autopilot products for the rest of the world. Fortunately, most of the autopilot manufacturers are understanding that, and you're seeing more and more movement towards that, and accepting that it's important for these autopilot interfaces to do that. Because I don't know about you, but as a aircraft, I'm not going to change my autopilot every 5 years to get the latest display technology. It's not going to do that, right? You want that autopilot to be there for 75 years. The Cap 140 that I had in my 2002 Diamond, was in there for 20 years, right? And it was a damn good autopilot for us, for me at that time. So I just think that the openness, we got to make sure we extend that to everything. Autopilots, transponders, displays, navigators, whatever it is, because we want our consumers to be able to choose the best of everything they can find and improve their flying safety. Nobody should be required to not be able to take advantage of the latest safety because they don't have the right display in there or the right navigator in there. And I think that's an important thing for our industry. As I get later on in my career, these things are more important to me to leave when I leave the industry, that we leave it in a place that we all can take advantage of the latest technologies, and we're not limited just because we made a decision 5 years ago to put a certain display or not a display in.
Right.
And I think that's important for our future.
It makes a lot of sense, and obviously it's a tough balance. I mean, integrated flight decks are gorgeous, and they all make sense. Everything works. But we have had examples in recent history, WAS, ADS-B, where once these new technologies come out, unfortunately, in many cases, the people who had those integrated flight decks were the last to be able to get those technologies, and often at a very high price, because you're kind of locked in. So it's tough, and that kind of leads me to why I tend to recommend for myself, and then also for friends, etc., that I like that you guys have to work hard to keep up and to be open to whatever happens. There's also a side note to that, I'll say, my personal experience on that, which is, since we're regularly getting software updates, whether it's from Aspen, whether it's for Avidyne, things like that, those software updates a lot of times have to do with that integration and the ability to make sure that they come out. I can't think of one for either of those companies I've ever paid for, and they almost always come with new features of some kind.
Yeah, sure.
So it's kind of a little bit, been a little benefit where you just keep getting new features because you guys have to work so hard. So I apologize for that, but I love it.
No, hey, it's the world we live in, Jeff. Times have changed, right? There are expectations, and those expectations are set by our phones, our iPads. And we as an industry need to recognize that's the way the world's moving, and we've got to do what we can to do that. Now, to be fair, we still have to make money. I mean, you can't give stuff away for free. And you try to find ways to provide, to make money off things that are value that people say, yes, I would pay extra for that. Right. But to get software change that changes a color and maybe adds a couple of features to it and charge for it, our customer base is probably not going to buy that, right? They're just not going to buy that. They're going to push back, and rightfully so, because we all live in a world that there's an expectation. That expectation has got to understand we have constraints and certification, stuff like that. But we as industry people and avionics have got to understand that the world has changed, right? We need to move with it.
Yeah. So speaking of the world, obviously our industry has been through a lot over the past 2 years through the pandemic, from the sky is falling and everything shutting down to now all of a sudden General Aviation is the ideal thing that everyone wants, and no one can meet demand, and then supply chain issues. It seems to me, as an outsider, and I don't have any inside information, that Aspen seems to be weathering this okay, but what's it been like leading a company through this?
Yeah. So, I'm glad you got a chance to bring up the supply chain thing, because we've been fortunate, but we have run into a lot of problems in the supply chain. Everybody's running into it. It's kind of hard to use it as an excuse because everybody in the world's dealing with supply chain. But we're running into situations where the day we're supposed to get parts, a supplier calls us up and says, "Oh, we gave your part to somebody else because they paid more for them. Next one's coming 6 months from now." or the supplier just decide that he's not going to build that part anymore and you need to change your part. And it's a 6-month lead time to get the new parts. And larger corporations are buying up parts. They're buying up parts to protect their supply chain. Small companies, we can't do that. We can't spend millions of dollars buying parts up on the open market. And when you do find parts, there are premiums. We have parts. I have examples of parts that cost me $3 a year ago. I'm paying $100 for it, but I got to get the part, right? And at the end of the day, we have so far, fingers crossed, knock on wood, have been able to weather those pretty well. Now, every morning I wake up and every time I get a call, email from my manufacturing or supply chain people, I'm just like nervous that they ran out of a part or something, because it is difficult. And I know it's hard on the consumer, especially if you've ordered something and then we all of a sudden change lead times from 2 weeks to 8 weeks. We don't like doing that either, and it's tough. It is very tough to make that decision and make that call. But I think that for us, we have done fairly well. That's not to say we won't run into a problem, and we have had some issues with our MAX upgrades in terms of pushing out lead times on the MAX upgrades because of some parts issues. That was unfortunate, but we couldn't do much about it. That has been a big thing. The whole COVID thing's been tough because of the safety aspects, and people, are not able to come in, and when you lose 25-30% of your manufacturing group for a week, that's a big deal, right? But at the end of the day, I think you just have to keep your focus on the customer and try to figure out what's best for them and try to manage your people and your organization around that. And that's easier said than done, because customers get, you spend money and you want your airplane. I don't know about you, but I get ticked off when my airplane's down for an annual. The annual takes an extra week. It's like, what's the matter with you guys? We know how tough that is, and we try our best. And I think the industry in general, I know there's been issues with certain vendors here and there, but I think as a whole, as an industry, we've actually not done too bad. And we've just been fortunate ourselves. I can't tell you that we've done anything special other than we're on top of it like everybody else, and the parts we haven't nailed us yet. They might, who knows? But it is a big problem within aviation, and managing through that is, again, my view is keep a focus on what the customer wants and try to meet what that customer wants, and never ever get mad at a customer or treat a customer poorly because they're mad at you because you pushed out lead times. Just be an aircraft owner and realize that, hey, you wouldn't like it either, so let's try to find ways. Do we have loaners? Do we have a way to get them other stuff or get them through something? We've taken things off our own aircrafts and providing to customers as loaners for a period of time. That's the kind of thing you got to do when you lead through this. I wish I had a magic formula to tell everybody, but it is basically firefighting 101, and you do the best you can.
It does put a smile on my face, the idea that you guys would go out and pull something off one of your aircraft to keep a customer going. I'm not sure you want to let everybody know that that's an option.
Yeah, probably. I can see my sales guys going, "Oh my God, he said that."
That's right. Next time your sales guy's explaining something out in the field or at a dealer, they're going to be like, "Well, give me yours."
Yeah, yeah. I'm sure that one's going to come back at me.
That's but do you? One of the things that's occurred to me, and I really, really hope this doesn't happen, but do you have any concerns as an industry, not at Aspen, just as an industry in general, whether it be avionics or whether it be mechanical or anything? All these different things are going on, from tires to you name it, where there's these massive supply chain problems, and a lot of it, that people are scrambling, doing whatever. Do you have concerns that we're going to look back on this time period and then start to see quality control issues in the future that happened during this? Is that inevitable?
I'm going to tell you that I don't think it's inevitable. It's certainly a concern that we all have to pay attention to, and I'll tell you why. My view is that when you overlay the processes that each of our companies have, whether it be AS9100 processes or other processes, and the amount of times we're audited to ensure that we're doing things right, and the FAA certification process, I think escapes, which is what I would call escapes. We have not seen a jump up in escapes in the industry so far, because I think in general, most of the leaders that I know will shut down a line before they will put out something that might be questionable. And you know, that's a tough call, and you know, there's always escapes here and there and stuff like that. And you know, we always have our problematic installs just like everybody does, but you do everything you can to ensure that you have that quality. So it does scare me with supply chain issues. I'll give you another example. One of the big problems with supply chain issues is counterfeit parts. So you go out and look for a part, and a broker finds parts for you, and you have to test them because there's counterfeit parts out there. That's a potential escape that could really destroy our industry. You start getting counterfeit parts out there, and something happens, and something like that goes on. You have to be real careful, but there are good processes in place to ensure that doesn't occur. I am optimistic that that won't happen, Jeff. I will tell you that many of us worry about that to make sure that doesn't happen. But I think our heritage and the leadership that I know that's in the industry, many of you met at Legends last Thursday, are the kind of people that won't let that happen. But as time goes on and people get wary and people do that, there's always the chance to let your guard down, and we really need to fight against that. And I think one of the things that a lot of people like yourself can do is keeping that in front of us to make sure that, you know, that doesn't happen, because the media has, I view, I don't know if the media agrees with me, but I view you guys have a responsibility to keep us in line as well. I mean, it's one of the good things about the aviation press. I mean, you guys don't just tell us what we want to hear, you challenge us, and that needs to be done, as well as the customers and everybody else. So I do worry a little bit about it, but I really believe that our industry can weather that, and we'll come through that in flying colors. So
excellent. Well, I mean, that's the hope. As long as everybody's thinking about it and they're as concerned as they are in you know, filling the gaps in the supply chain, I think then hopefully we'll all be okay. I just don't want, no one wants to get a double whammy.
No, of course not. No.
So you mentioned, I'd like to kind of wrap up on what's next for Aspen, and you already made some hints there, because I didn't even have to ask a question before you talked about formats, and let a little something at least sneak out. Tell me what's coming for Aspen for General Aviation in that area.
Yeah, so we're constantly looking at newer and upgrading, whether it be form factors or other functionality, connectivity, all the things that are there. And you can understand that a larger screen format often makes it easier to do things, because you can only jam so much on a certain form factor that's there. So we're experimenting and looking at different things. I think you're going to see some activity in that area over the next 5 years, full well knowing that our current form factor is very successful, and we'll continue to evolve that form factor as well. But as we grow, I think we're going to be more adventuresome in those areas. I want to say it, maybe even expanding even our product lines beyond just displays. The eVTOL areas that we see have created opportunities to try to do some new things, and that will spill into general aviation for sure, depending on whether you call eVTOL general aviation or not. But that kind of technology will spill backwards, and as we're getting into that, we'll see that as well. So without being too specific, I think you're going to find Aspen being a little bit more visible in the next couple, 3, 4, 5 years, with some other ideas about displays and potentially other products as well.
That's fascinating, of course, because Aspen, now you're part of the Aero group, and that's tell me a little bit about that. That's a larger group, and certainly does give you exposure to this whole wild west of what's the next generation of eVTOL or transportation going to be.
Yeah, so as everybody knows, is that Aspen joined the Aero Group as a consortium of a bunch of different companies, some in the eVTOL market, some in military side, some in just drone, artificial intelligence and things of that nature. And that's giving us access to technologies to look into general aviation, collision avoidance, see and avoid type technologies, technologies around human interface type stuff. That access to that technology and working with these fine companies is going to bleed back into GA, and you're going to be seeing us doing more and more of that. into there, because the eVTOL is kind of a Wild West rodeo environment right now. And that creates innovation, right? When you're not constrained by, how things were done in the past, some cool things pop out. And being part of Aero gives us access to those developments and our ability to bring that technology back into the general aviation market is extremely exciting for most of us. And as an engineer, it's extremely exciting myself, but more importantly, as a pilot, I see some of the cool stuff that's being done, just in seeing avoid technologies and stuff like that, how you wrap that back into displays and controls and things like that to improve safety. I mean, one of my most frustrating things, I get a traffic thing, see it on my ADS-B, I look out the window, and for the life of me, I can't find that airplane. Sure would be nice to be able to have something portrayed on my windscreen. It's over there. Look there.
Yep.
Things like that are just, you read about them today. That kind of stuff, that market space, I think, is going to bring that technology back into general aviation. And we're excited about being the person that brings it into aviation, and being part of Aero Group gives us that access.
Well, it's going to be fascinating to see, that's for sure. I mean, I've been asked many times by people what I think all of this connection is going to be for general aviation from this whole world of urban air mobility and eVTOL and everything else. And I've just said, what are the two things that this market needs? It needs, some type of autonomous control. It needs data link. Like, that's what makes this whole world work. And so if they're going to be investing in all these things, what are we going to get in GA? It's probably going to be somewhere around autonomy and data link.
I think you're going to find certainly data availability. Of course, you have to care for those cybersecurity aspects of all that stuff, but data connectivity to the cockpit, to the ATC, that multifaceted data link ability is going to provide all kinds of possibilities for the average flyer, and for emergency situations, and for access to the airways. And you're seeing eVTOLs that want to fly in cities. All that stuff's going to happen, and that's going to bleed back into general aviation, and I think people are going to be excited about it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, John, thank you so much for joining us this evening here on SocialFlight Live. Love, obviously, Aspen Avionics and flying behind the equipment. It's been great to have your perspective on all of this, and congratulations again, of course, for being a living legend. It was great seeing you out there.
Thanks, Jeff. It was great fun to see you out there, and I really appreciate being part of this, and thanks for the time you took today.
Absolutely. And to all of you, I'd also like to thank you so much for joining us and taking time out of your evening to join us here on SocialFlight Live. You can see more on our Aspen, on some of our trips on our YouTube, especially the more recent one that we did going to Yellowstone. We're going to the one that's out there right now of flying to Glacier National Park, and of course, our Titan T51D Mustang build, where you can see us installing the Aspen and cutting our panel and all the things that go around that. Please join us again next week on February 1st. Author and airline pilot Laura Savino will be with us. She has a really fascinating tale of what it was like to climb the ranks there to flying aircraft that you get to make the call sign heavy when you're calling in. She flies some of the largest aircraft in the commercial fleet, and it's just such a cool story, and she's also an author, so that'll be great. In addition to that, on February 8th, GAMA's George Brawley will be back with us. We're going to talk about engine operation and all sorts of things you can learn about flying from him and how best to operate that piston out front. And then on February 15th, our friend, actor and pilot Treat Williams will be joining us, and we're just going to have an evening of hangar flying. Until next time, I'd like to thank you all for taking your time to join us here on SocialFlight Live, and I wish you all blue skies.